Hey, good evening and welcome to our live monthly threaded collective Q&A. My name is Adrienne Garrison and I'll be your host for this evening. Threaded is an organization that helps people like you effectively bring the love of Christ to racial conflict and conversation. We know that racial conversation can be a minefield, so we created this space to help you talk through some of the questions and concerns you have. Joining us for our April live Q&A are Marcus Lloyd, Antoine Malone, and Shantara McBride. How are you guys doing tonight?
Feeling good. Thank you, Adrienne.
Feeling good. So does it feel like a long time, Marcus? Like it for some reason it feels like we haven't talked like with the people in a long time. But it hasn't been. Like the last thing we did that color commentary live, and that was the Will Smith and Chris Rock thing.
Yeah, that feels like a while ago. I think
maybe right. Am I the only one? Okay.
The news cycle just is constantly turning over. You know what I mean? Nobody's been smacked in the face recently.
The moment I heard that, I was like, okay, Antoine and Marcus are going to be all over that.
Oh, man. we waited on it. We were like, Antoine was immediate. I wasn't even watching it at the time. And Antoine was like, what you think about that Chris Rock thing? I was like, what are you talking about? I'm gonna go back and watch it. What should I be looking for? He goes, what he said, you'll know it when you see
it. You'll know it when you see it. I'm not going to even.
He didn't give me no warning, like, anything.
Wait for Chris Rock to show up and hold on.
And I was just like, it was all recorded, and my wife is I'm sitting out on my front porch, like doing some schoolwork. She's watching it like live in the other room, and so I just go on our recording deal and I just fast forward until I see Chris Rock, and I'm like, oh, let's see what this is. And then it was all.
And then you knew.
And I knew. I didn't have any problem recognizing what he was asking me about. So
I didn't think you would.
No. So it has been a minute since you and I were on that, and then of course just prior to that was when we did this last time. So, and Adrienne is 1 month more pregnant this month. That's exciting.
Indeed, it's a never-ending pregnancy.
Well, look, I don't even think the people knew about it until like maybe last month. I think you just hide it so well. Although I know you're
true.
Like,
she's just like this the whole time.
I'm gonna close up on my face just for being here. I'm excited for you. Any updates for the people so that they can pray for you and be excited about anything coming up for you? I mean, obviously there's a baby coming, right? But in your own person, how do you feel?
I feel really good. I'm just so grateful. Children are blessings, and this will be our third child. And we did decide on a name. We're calling him Samuel. And I love the story of Hannah. I can't get over it. Her posture and the way that she cried out to the Lord. And Samuel means God hears us, or God listens. And for my family, my husband's in healthcare. He's an emergency medicine physician. And so these last 2 years have just been really, for everyone on the planet, really complex. But for us, have carried like additional levels of risk and unknown. And we kind of thought we were in the clear and could try for this third baby. And then Delta hit. And that honestly was like the hardest season for our family. And so we've never been more confident and just more deeply aware that our God is a listening God. He's the one who hears us. So we're excited to meet this little guy and for him to carry that promise and remind us of that.
I love when there's a good story associated with the name that they can kind of take with them into their life. So that's really cool.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that with us. People love it. We got some loves.
Hannah. I mean, not Hannah. Well, Hannah's who you talked about, but Samuel. It's a strong name.
You gonna call him Sammy? Samuel?
All the things, probably. I don't know. We'll see. We'll see what fits.
Did you with your other kids, did you have in mind that you was going to call them a nickname and just found
Yeah.
yourself not calling them that? Did that?
Oh,
Oh,
no.
no,
I
you
am
knew ahead
into
of time.
we always liked the names that were kind of like old-fashioned names that had good nicknames. So, I have a
Ah,
Penelope who's Penny, and Theodore who's Theo,
ah,
and now
okay.
Samuel. Samuel.
Hmm. See, I
Yeah.
have an Elijah that I thought I was going to say Eli, but I never do.
Oh,
Never have.
Uh-huh.
Never have. So it's just E because it's even less. It's even less to say instead of Eli. How can I be Morley? So it's just it's either Elijah or E. But
I love it.
I thought for sure. Oh, or I wanted to name him Nathan.
Mm.
So his middle name is Nathaniel. So I thought I was going to call him Nathan as well. And it turned out that none of those things worked. Like it just was E.
Yeah, you can choose a name, but, what they
They
settle
kind of,
into is
yeah.
kind of based on your personality, right? Yeah, I think that's true.
that is the strangest thing about how that personality actually seems to
Dictate.
match up with whatever the name is, right? It's just a bit odd. For me, I've noticed it with my own kids. My youngest his name is Solomon Judah Lloyd, right? And so he's
Mm.
peaceful lion, and that's exactly what he is.
Oh, wow, I
He's
love that.
very cool and
Yeah.
peaceful, but like also fierce
Mhm.
when he's ready to be. You know what I mean?
Very
And
focused. He has a deep focus. I've
deep,
noticed. Like
deep
he can,
focus.
seems to be where he can just really lock in.
Oh my gosh, yeah, a little too much. You know what I mean? Like it's like, bro, you don't have to fight everything. Like you don't have like if you don't get it just right,
That's
he's
why
like,
you gotta be careful about those names
I
because then
know.
they
Well,
become prophetic.
the thing about it is like we had like
Exactly.
my oldest son was warrior of God, and he's just nuts. He's just lots of energy, and we wanted Solomon for like a peaceful like
Yes.
calming, and
What
so
is
that's what
what
he.
is warrior of God? What is that?
It's my name, Marcus Lloyd, Marcus
Okay,
Timothy.
Marcus. Okay.
Yeah, so we named him after me. We call him Deuce. So it's
Okay.
yes, the man, the myth.
I
Looks
love
like
it.
look, Shantara, you are not supposed to be there. You are supposed to be here. I'm going to try to get Shantara in.
We got to get her the link.
Yes.
I know. I'm trying to. I
She's
know
like, I
Janelle's.
showed up. I'm here. What y'all need?
All right, I'm gonna make sure we get the link. Check with Jen. I know she sent you the link, Shantara. We're gonna get you in here. We want your perspective
Yes.
in here, but we can probably jump in, Adrian, if you want. We'll get her in here.
Sure. Yes. We have a really okay. Well, Chantar, with the good part's gonna happen when you get on here, but we'll let these guys get rolling because they generally have plenty to say. So here is just your first question out of the gate. It's just a little question. Okay, you ready?
All right.
If white people who enslaved Africans believed they needed to convert those they enslaved to Christianity, how did they reconcile that with their views of heaven? Did they think that there would still be a racial hierarchy in heaven? So a little bit of history, a little bit of your take on that.
I'd like to ask them. I mean, I think that's the question, right?
Marcus is like, inquiring minds want to
I'm
know. Yeah.
curious, which
Things
is
that make you go,
yeah, and it may just be again the what's the word I'm looking, the arrogance of the now, right? Like we just assume like now we see things and we're like, that's the dumbest thing ever. To think well in some ways of people, like there's some kind of cognitive dissonance that they were existing in that justified this idea of enslaving people, and that this was a heaven. Now, historically, I mean, if you start to expand, go deeper in, and you kind of read, how people talked about race and all that kind of stuff, you know, it was communicated via, ministry leaders and whatnot that the perfect nirvana, right, the actual heaven itself, perfect civilization had Black people in their rightful place, which is a serving space. And that comes all the way back. It goes all the way back to the curse of Ham, in which ultimately what they would say is you're going to serve your brother, right? And so they go, okay, curse of Ham, that's Black people. They're in service. That's their place in which God has asked them to be. That is their what's the word I'm looking for? That is their primary, their spot that they're supposed to exist in, right? That's what that kind of stuff. And so in the midst of
Hi.
let me finish this. And so in the midst of that, I think they just justified it that way. And look, and again, I was not there. So
I think that's it. Yeah, go ahead and introduce.
Yeah. Let me jump in. I want to introduce the people to my, we've known each other for a little bit, but we haven't had as much interaction as I think we should have.
Yes.
But I want y'all to come into the conversation. We're bringing in Shantara McBride. She is an author. She's a preacher, a speaker, a teacher. She is the founder of Marvelous University. Marvelous, the social enterprise that offers life coaching and success planning.
With two A, is it two A's in when you spell it?
Did I put you in there?
MAAH.
Marvelous University. So she's great. Loves to work with the young people, youth development, youth needs, diversity, inclusion, allyship. I know we talked a long time about that the other day when we were hanging out. And so it's great to have you here. You got a book as well, right, Shantara? Tell us a little bit about the book that you've put out there, and then we'll jump back into the convo.
First of all, I have to apologize to Janelle because, of course, she sent me the link, and of course,
This is my assistant Janelle. She's like, why is she not on here?
I know. I was like, I don't have it, and I went back to my emails. I was like, oh, there it is. So I apologize. Yes. So, hey, y'all, it is wonderful to be with the Threaded community. I've been looking forward to this. And yes, I have a book coming out that I wrote with a friend of mine. Her name is Rosalind Wiseman. She wrote Queen Bees and Wannabes, and Tina Fey read it and wrote Mean Girls. And so we have known each other since way back in the 90s, which sounds like a long time to people.
It feels like a long time.
It's like a long time.
It feels like a long time for sure.
It does. But we wrote a book together called Courageous Discomfort: How to Have Brave, Important, Life-Changing Conversations About Race and Racism. And
we gonna get her on color commentary when that comes out, so we can go even deeper in on that. I'm just excited for the, again, just more content moving into the space, content that is being produced by people of color. But Ross, she's a Jewish American, correct?
She is. So she's more Jewish in she's not practicing, but she definitely identifies as she's Jewish. Yeah, she's Jewish. So I'm not Jewish, and I'm Black and a Christian. Right. I like to clear it up. I like to clear it up for the people. So it's been really interesting. But we can talk more about that as it gets closer. But my Lord. Yeah.
My Lord. Well, we're excited to have you in. I don't know if you heard the first question out of the gate, but if you got any thoughts, I don't know if I like to I gave kind of the overarching, but Adrian, pull that question out one more time.
Let me pull it out again. It's just basically trying to reconcile how white people were reconciling these ideas of needing to convert people they enslaved with their views of heaven. Basically, did they think that there would still be a racial hierarchy in heaven? And I want to slow down just like a little bit, just in case we have like viewers who are not super familiar with some of the things that Marcus said. I just thought, can we slow that down a little bit and clarify some things? Like curse of Ham is probably worth a little biblical recap if you have a second. And then can we dispel any of us this idea that enslaved people were first exposed to Christianity by their enslavers? That's not necessarily true. So I'm at any point, any of you guys jump in, because I think that this deserves some attention, and honestly might be the first time some people have thought about it or learned about it.
Most definitely. Well, curse of Ham, just to jump on that first, to say it simply, Ham was one of the sons of Noah. I forget where it is in Genesis, but in essence, Ham sees Noah naked and drunk after his little cruise. And
did you really kind of
what?
But you made it go like that makes more sense, actually.
I know, like, you're like, of course he was drunk. Like that's what they were doing the whole time.
Yeah,
no, but
carnival. It was a Carnival cruise. So he
It
was
was a
in the
carnival. It was for free. They had all of it. It was all expense paid.
all inclusive.
Yeah,
Fantastic.
no, but so he saw Noah, and so Noah curses Ham, and basically an entire theology was built out of that curse that said that the descendants of Ham were all the people of color, all of the ites, if you will. So a lot of the Canaanites, the very almost all the enemies of Israel, they were characterized as sons of Ham and antagonistic to God's people, which is the other peoples, and that they had a specific place as a subservient entity to the other brothers as a result of that curse. That's a really, really, really like broad
Yeah.
broad sort of definition of that. But what it ends up looking like is the white persons saw themselves as the descendants of the other sons. I think it's Shem, and therefore decided that it was their role, their divine role, to put in order all of creation beneath them, including the cursed Ham. And that's kind of what Marcus was getting at, where the theology at the time was that God's ordained order with the races was hierarchical, and that the white persons held the top spot and everyone beneath them. And anything outside of that order was against God's design, and therefore any politics or ideas or even the civil rights movement from any of them, all that stuff was a spiritual attack on their view of God's design. And that's why you have the Ku Klux Klan, who would call themselves Christians, and they would burn a cross. What they're saying is, we are defending God's way of things, and we should be at the top, and this order is ordained. And so I would say that would be what informs their view even of heaven, potentially, as a result to the original question. Because if you allow that to breathe, then there's no reason to think that what should be here on earth is not what they would step into in their imaginations for what heaven, which would be the same thing, a different kind of space. Only they wouldn't have to fight for creation to be in their place. Everything would happily be in its place. So whites would still be on top. Blacks would be servant to whites, but would love it, would be happy and fulfill that role in a as innate, as a natural instinct that they would love, as they fall into this sort of supremacist utopia that they imagine comes out of this curse from Ham. So that's a brief summary.
Yeah. And I feel like I was exposed to it less from such an overt supremacy standpoint, but more of a wash your hands standpoint. Like, why did this terrible thing happen in history? Well, curse from God. What can you say?
Yeah. Yeah. So you can't do anything about it, even if you want to change it, because this is what God was doing, is what you're saying, how it was presented to you.
Justified slavery because it was a curse from God. It was really broken.
And so that other question you had was about, what was the second thing you mentioned? Oh, yes, Marcus, you can probably, or Shantae, whoever, you can grab that next thing.
Yeah, I think it's, the way, and I love that you slowed it down, because I think there is this idea that when Gomez Zarara, who is kind of the father of racism in some ways, as people would put it if you kind of read through certain books, when the sort of Spanish settlers or Spanish conquistadors, travelers, whatever, found or made their way over to Africa, and they kind of found these people, that was the first time that Christianity had ever touched the continent. But honestly, you can just go through the biblical text and you can find, I mean, even if you're thinking through Shem and all those things, you can kind of look at the Canaanites and things of that nature, people of color, Black people in the Bible, Moses's wife in there, and in some case, the ways in which people look at the genealogy even of Jesus having people that would have been dark skinned, called dark skinned, into the space and kind of the lineage of Jesus, even a disciple potentially. And then if you go into obviously Acts, and you start to see the story of Antioch, there were several folks from the African continent that were represented there. That church in and of itself really represented a lot of the diversity that was existing at that time, particularly the Jewish culture across the world. And so you're going to find the Ethiopian eunuch is arguably the very first Gentile. Most people give Cornelius the Gentile sort of the space where the Gentiles come to know Christ as the Gentile Pentecost, if you will. But there's some discussion about the Ethiopian eunuch, whether this person was actually a practicing Jew or just somebody who was more of a sojourner, somebody who was connected to Judaism because he worked for somebody. So he potentially is the first convert to Christianity, if you will, as a Gentile. So that's just one thing, one place in which we see that maneuvering out into the space. And again, you've got,
and you have, well, really, like real quick, Marcus, like there's so many other places though. Like
I know.
there's like the hidden, the sort of hint at it is when Jesus is chastising the Pharisees and he says, "You're so excited about proselytizing, you go over land and sea." What are the destinations of this land and sea that they're going over? These are places that are south of where they are, because that's where the sea is, and going toward these other darker complected spaces. And then there's the most obvious hint is Acts 2, where we see the Spirit of God move, and all of a sudden we see this burst of all these different languages. And even that scene, you have to wonder, like, the people who are talking and listening, they're all there, and they're probably all multicolored, right? And so
representation from all major areas, all of
from around the area.
Culture.
So we do have the name of Cornelius and of we don't have the name of the Ethiopian eunuch, but we do have those singular persons. But we also have these hints to this more diverse exposure from Jesus as far as the proselytization of those Pharisees and them bringing people to Jerusalem, when Jesus was talking, and so they would have heard him, and some of them likely would have followed. And then you also have the Acts picture, and you have these other two. So anyway, I just wanted to throw those things in there.
Yeah, and that's the point, is that there's so many different, and there's lots of good research that you can do kind of on your own, if you will, to find those different places. But it's important for us and important for everyone to recognize that, again, there was, and this goes back to the idea of the mission of God, really, period. Right? I think we think about the mission of God as something that doesn't get done without us, right? As if God needs us to do it. But God is always at work in places. And many times what happens is we show up someplace that God has already been at work, and we translate what God has been doing in that space. And so when you get to, quote unquote, this discovery of the African peoples, God was there. And it's reminiscent of the ways in which we look at our outreach, even in church today, with this idea of we're going to go take the gospel someplace.
Colonization.
It does not recognize, right, in its colonization thought process, that there has already been a conqueror there. We're coming now as investigators and detectives to find out, what is Jesus already doing here? And again, that's just something we've taken with us, even to, I would say, I think there's people who still wrestle with that even now. I've been in churches, worked in churches where you still have that mentality of, we're going to take the gospel to these places that don't know Jesus. Like, wait a second, hold up. So I don't know, Shantara, you want to jump in on any?
The only thing I will say is that my heart breaks for people who need a way, and we do this every day, right? We want to justify sin. And I think that's what I hear is that, we're justifying our sin instead of taking ownership and repenting of the sin. We want to justify the sin, and that breaks my heart. That there is this, and it's been happening generations and for like, we've passed this down, that we are going to justify our sin, and that, I think, oh my gosh, when I hear how the Bible has been used to for people to justify people hating one another, that is so contrary to Jesus that it just doesn't, I'm like, it doesn't match to me. And one of the books that I've loved and that I tell everybody about when they have, because of course Christianity is a white man's religion. It is not. But one of my favorite books is Urban Apologetics by Dr. Eric Mason, and he really talks about how basically Plymouth Rock didn't land on us, and so it's this idea that white people, that Christianity was already there, just like what Marcus said, and it was not the white man's religion. And I think that the more that people of color, the more that Black people, because Black people love to say that it's a white man's religion, the more that we understand the truth, the more that we can truly be set free. But I don't know, hearing all of that, my heart just like, oh my goodness, people are still using the Bible to justify sin, but we do that every day,
Yeah.
So.
Fun fact too, there's I've been looking at a lot of research and statistics lately, and fastest growing Christian continent is Africa right now. And and of the 7 continents of the North America has fallen to 4th place as a growing Christian population per capita, whereas Africa is starting to lead the way in our modern moment, and to the degree that some of the global conversations that are being had, and I'm having them from a young adult perspective, but some of the global conversations that are being had is to how do we leverage the movement that God is doing in Africa to better reach some of the Christian depravity that we're seeing here in North America. It's a very interesting shift of the locus in our modern moment as well as historical.
Well, I mean, and I would first I would say I don't know. I have some theories as to why it's happening. Especially, I've been to South Africa, and I've been to what people would call Northern Africa. So I've been to Morocco, and I can tell you, being here in the United States and the whole, and North America, like, love your neighbor as yourself. Basically, living out scripture is we turn a side eye to that. We don't want to live out scripture. And when we say that, oh, Jesus says love your neighbor as yourself and love me, we don't live it out. So it wouldn't be attractive to me if I was, if I was here or I was visiting and because it's like, we don't live out the scripture. And again, we like to justify why we are not going to live out the scripture. And we like to tell people, well, I understand that is a part of the Bible, but Jesus meant that my next door neighbor. And, we put these parameters on, and he's like, I actually didn't. So, it's just living it out. And I think culturally living out, taking care of each other, oh my goodness, we like to do that only in tragedy. And then it's short-lived.
Well, and there's, we talk about, I don't know if we've said it here before, but there's an effect that happens on a society that continues to read the Bible from above. And there's an effect when you read it from below. And everybody who wrote in the Bible represented really a brown, marginalized group. And so it would make more sense for those who have experienced being brown and marginalized to find really a lot of comfort in the message of the Bible and what it's talking about. It's not just a book for the marginalized. Don't get it twisted. Because when Jesus died on the cross, which we celebrated a couple of days ago, he died for everyone. He died for the marginalized and the rich. But what he said, and I was telling my son this the other day, he said how difficult it is for the rich to enter the kingdom of heaven. And I was talking to my son, it's like, because they don't know they need God, right? They're looking at the narrative from empire and from power, which is not the way in which Jesus chooses to act, although he has full empire and full power. And so and to your point, Antoine, we do cultural intelligence training, through Threaded, and I get to teach that a lot. And what we always talk about is that the face of Christianity is actually an Anglican African woman. That's the new face of Christianity right now. And it's again, it's growing. And many times, and actually what's happening, even to go beyond that, the missionaries that are being sent out are coming more from other places. It's actually, the last time I checked, the missionaries that were mostly coming, they're coming from kind of China and Asian area countries, if you will. And they're being sent out, and many of them are being sent here to minister to us. And I've got my own theories about that we've got on the show. I don't need to get into it here, but it's a very telling aspect to ultimately this idea of, is there a racial hierarchy in heaven? And as Kenton himself, I can see it. He's like, but to the point that Kenton has on the chat here, of course they thought there'd be a racial hierarchy. Why would they? When you read it from above, and you read it from a place of power, you just assume that it's going to be what you're experiencing.
The way you imagine it. Yeah.
I think all the time about Copernicus realizing that, that our solar system revolved around the sun and not Earth. When I think of white privilege and the brain transformation that needs to occur, and there's something like, I love thinking of like St. Augustine as a church father, being an African man. I have a dear friend whose family is native to India, and he talks about how, I think it was St. Thomas that was sent to India. And so where they're from in India has been Christian for millennia. And every time I hear these stories and think about it, it's one more piece clicking into the right place in my mind to reorient out of my whiteness being central and God, reorienting to God being central. And it is such a good feeling. And I think anytime we can correct this mythology of Christianity being white in its origin or in its current state, it's so needed. And there was immense resistance to the idea that of what was true, right? That all the planets revolved around the sun, and simultaneously we're going through that now. And of course there's resistance, but ultimately, how do you resist truth? And the more that you can acquiesce to it and reorient yourself, like it is good to be oriented in what is true. It feels right.
And and I would say it's almost like a discombobulating in a sense, because the things we're talking about, I think it's not far off. Like, there are many people who in the last 5 years have realized that Jesus wasn't white. Like, it's the first time they've ever thought about it. And I think how discombobulating,
which is very weird.
Well, but I mean, I would say that it's
weird because we've had this conversation for most of our lives, more than likely you and I. But so that's why it's like, wait a minute, we talked about that when I was like 8 years old.
Well, here's what I would say is, I'm not just saying they're white people. I think that there's Black people who think the same thing. And you can say Black people in America, you could say Africans, because that's what you've been taught. I mean, you can go to plenty of Black churches. They're probably not there now, but you would find a white
got the same pictures. Yeah.
Same pictures. So it doesn't need to be, oh, white people are villains and they didn't know about this. Like, plenty of people did not know about this. I've said this story many times. Subconsciously in my mind, whenever I pictured heaven, I pictured just white people there, because that's all that was ever shown to me. And it wasn't, but 10 years ago that I was reading through something in the scriptures, and it clicked, and I was like, wait, I've been thinking this in my mind. I don't know if I've ever consciously thought this, but I think I've never thought I got to keep my color, because I thought we homogenized into just this naked babies with on clouds, whatever those things are, and how like empowering that is to kind of really like, oh, you're not an accident. You're actually intentional. And this is where, and this is the result, if you will, of color blindness. Right? The idea that we're not going to see color. And so we just assume the people who say that are usually white people. So since they're talking about not seeing color, they just make everything white because it doesn't matter. Like, color doesn't matter. But God, his story is different. You know what I mean? Like, it's just a different story, and it's exciting. But if this is new, it's very discombobulating.
We're
and think through everything you've been taught. When you start to come to that space.
Yeah, we were talking about that in our white man's Christianity is not the white man's religion podcast we did not too long ago.
Oh, yeah.
But we were talking about the fact that sometimes it took some energy to realize that there's really no prominent white person used in scripture. Like the prophets are not white people.
You got to
You
look
know, like
for 'em.
they're Jewish, you know, so
Mhm.
so like
Wow.
even your pic, even for me too, growing up, some of my pictures of Paul
Right.
Mhm.
or of the disciples or of Jeremiah or of Moses or of David or of Saul or of Nathaniel the prophet, or really you gotta actually, if you really think about it, and it doesn't mean, this is what it doesn't mean, as you said, Marcus, it doesn't mean that white is less,
Yeah.
right? That's not the point of the conversation. We're not trying to, it's not about a, you know, this isn't
Villainize
about
and try.
this,
Yeah.
this isn't a value conversation. This is just stripping something that has relevance to how we do society away from what the true story of the Bible is.
Mhm.
You have to look intently to find anyone who speaks with authority in the scriptures who are white. Any
Mhm.
apostle, any preacher, any prophet, any writer, you're going to have to look for that. And
Which would be like Eurasian, like European descent, basically. I mean,
Yeah.
I guess I feel like we're getting into this thing where you keep saying white and like, oh yeah, but the thing is,
Right.
what is white?
yeah, what is white,
exactly.
right? Yeah, that's right. So European, you're right. So European, because that stuff's just not there. You know, you don't have the Norse and Viking. Like those aren't. This story is about this brown area where it pertains to skin color, and so even my imaginations when I'm reading scripture, sometimes I fill in pictures that, as you said, Marcus, match more what my culture, what the American culture has imprinted on us
Yeah.
Mhm.
than what the Bible is actually saying. Adam and Eve, you know, again, you know, a
Mhm.
lot of, there's just no place. There's no place. There's not many. You get the Roman centurions, and that's
Yeah.
about where you get to start. And then you get some of the Greek stuff in the New
Right.
Testament. But all the prominent authoritative voices are non-white voices. And therefore, by definition, should make it not the white man's religion on that alone. How can it be the white man's religion
Ta-da!
when no white persons speak to any real authority? They have no authoritative white voices. All the
Wow.
authoritative voices are non-white voices. So that should
Which
knock that
should
one
make
out.
you see how it was used as a weapon and not
Mhm.
used for love. Like that in it of itself. Like when we start pulling back the layers, it becomes this like, oh, y'all use this so I can hate other people. Oh, okay, now I see how how it was used. But instead, it's like you see the truth. It should set you free. That's what that's what the Bible says. But I get it. It's like we've been told a story for so long that it becomes the truth. Even if it's a lie, we make it the truth, right? And so and that's why my heart goes out to people, because I'm just like, oh my goodness, this is what you have been taught and told, and oh my God, they have been lying to you. Bless your heart. Like that truly is where my heart goes. Not, I've passed the point where I'm like, well, now you should know better and just deal with it. I truly think, oh my goodness,
Yeah.
you have been told this lie by, parents, by grandparents, by great grandparents, and it's just like by your pastor, and it takes some time to unbelieve that.
I
Yeah.
have hope. I have hope for the kids because we have got amazing people working on getting much better
Yeah.
representation. And I think about The Chosen. I don't know if you guys have been following
Yeah.
that series, but just a beautiful job that they've done being, making representation such a key element of that story. And I don't know what it would be like to grow up without this mythology literally filtering all of God's word, filtering over all of God's word, the mythology of
Yeah.
white supremacy. I don't know what that would be like, but I'm hopeful that they can get to the heart of the matter if they can just like disillusion, not grow up with that illusion.
Yeah. What's funny, just a kind of a side funny story. So, my wife and I are both actors, and she gets to kind of practice more than I do these days because I've got other things to do. But they shoot, they've shot The Chosen here in the Dallas area for season 1, then they went over to Utah, and now they're back shooting down in kind of South Dallas, Ellis County area. And so my wife has tried through the agent, like, hey, I want to get on the show. And my wife is white. Now she plays other kinds of, ethnic places. She usually gets kind of Hispanic, maybe Asian, a lot of times where she can play that as well. But she's a little too light. And so she has had the hardest time like getting in because they're like, nah, we're looking for browner people. Sorry about that. So it's just kind of funny to see because it was like, years ago, it would have just been her. You know what I mean? She
Yep.
would have been Mary, which she has played Mary many times. But now it's like, nah, you actually don't fit. So you're right. I think there's a change going. And again, to your point, Shantara, like if you've been in this space like that, I think that's still, and I'll use the word again, discombobulating. Like I think this is part of the reaction is at the core of everything you've thought. You're starting to see that you don't matter as much as you thought you did.
Woof, woof.
You know what I mean? Like you're not as important. You don't have this high place and value, and your history has tried to teach you other things, and you don't know how to kind of work that out. Like I think that's part of it. And I feel bad because it's tough.
Listen,
there's a traumatic.
But what a lie that your
Agree.
skin color
Yeah.
is what defines your worth.
Yeah.
Like one way or
Right.
the other.
yeah,
Like,
but
what
it's
a-
Right.
worked. I mean, we don't like to believe that we're not as important as we're on our jobs,
Yeah.
let alone to God.
God,
So it's
right?
like,
Yeah.
it's like, hold on,
Wait a second.
I'm gonna see what they do without me. Me and my cashier
And
skills
your
are going
job-
away.
and listen,
And this case
are
is
you
going
kidding me?
down.
Your job is posted before you walk out the door.
Right.
Like that is so when
They
we
gonna make
truly-
it.
Listen, I've already made it because they got somebody ready to replace you. So when we try to figure that out, like about God, it's like, hold on, wait a second.
It's hard.
It's hard. So I really do. I know how I am just within my family. So I can't imagine, just the idea of like truly wrapping my brain around this unbelief. And I know people who will be like, well, whatever, they need to get over it and they just need to roll with it because it's the truth. I hear you and I understand. However, there are so many things that, especially as a culture, that has been taught to us. And yes, I mean, I could complain about I wasn't taught this in middle school and high school. Wasn't taught this in, Sunday school. But I truly can also sit back and say they taught what they knew. And now it's time. Now that we know better, now we must do better. And again, my heart goes out, and I'm just like, whoa. Now that doesn't mean I'm going to continue to accept mistreatment and that
Sure.
So there is also
I heard
like,
you, but we're gonna have to change this.
We gotta do something different now. Yeah, we can't unsee what we've seen now. We're gonna have to move forward.
I'm not gonna be called names, and you're not gonna be able to skip me, but so
Yeah.
there is that. But I truly think about, again, just the lies that we've been told, and just even family, like we pass down these lies, and when the truth is uncovered, it's like, oh my goodness. And I don't know, maybe they're gonna take my black card, but I just really feel like that this is really surprising to a lot of people.
Yeah, I think too, like there's two things. It's kind of I don't think for this room it'll be a shock, but just race has mattered way more than we think. And it's conversations like this that reveal that, when your view of race and the value therein starts to affect how you imagine things, how you create. That's why it's so important to see like children and how they play with dolls, right? You start to see that you didn't have to say a whole lot, but they just caught things from community, from the culture, and their imaginations were shaped by those racialized so there's those racialized thoughts, right? So when the imagination is shifted like that, then that's one thing. It just, race has mattered way more than it needed to. But also that same energy that was like, hey, we want to protect the proper design that God put in place. I would love for that same energy maybe not the destructive versions of it,
Right.
but that same energy to say, oh, okay, we still are good with God's design, but it wasn't what we
Yes.
thought it was.
It's so
God's
good,
design
Antoine.
is actually this.
Mhm.
Let's bring the energy that we were bringing to this other thing to this correction
Yes.
of the energy. And what we don't have is that. What we have is, oh, we were wrong about that. Okay. And now all of a sudden we no longer have the energy to defend the theological design of God. Now it's just like, well, we just got to figure it out. The race is just a thing that we got to deal with. We'll never get it right this side of heaven. Throw your hands up, forget it. Let's just keep moving, do the best we can. But just a minute ago, we were burning crosses in people's yards because we felt like we need to protect God's design. God's design is this now. How do we protect it? How do we bring that energy forward? And that's really kind of what Threaded is trying to promote, is there's a way God designed it. And if no one else can begin to represent that, God's people, his church should be where it starts. And if we can't get it right, there's no way we're going to see it on a more secular social scale. But man, we have lost our zeal for protecting the design.
Well, you guys are walking it out here per usual, and Shantara, you fit right in. It would not be a monthly Q&A without an absurdly beautiful and redemptive amount of empathy for white people, and me over here going,
Yeah, I mean, listen, again,
please, can we just like crank up the heat a little bit?
Shantara, you took my role this week.
You guys are amazing. Amazing.
Well,
I once heard it said, like, that this is the difference between, when Christians come to the table to talk about these things, in the ideal world, and Christians in the truest sense, not nominal Christians, is that they come to the table and they stay there. They stay there through the uncomfortable, messy process. And I feel like that every month when I come here. I'm just like, you have expended emotional and mental energy to walk a mile in there, in people's shoes who have, systemically and individually harmed you your entire lives. Like, that is Christ. That is absolutely Christ. And every month I'm like, I hear you, God, that I'm taking notes. Don't worry, but I'm still rolling my eyes. Because, I'm not fully sanctified yet.
And I'll speak for myself. I'm not past a good eye roll either.
That's why I said I will not be called names. You will not listen. In Jesus' name and with the love of Christ. However, there are too many. I think there's a fine line in continuing to be disrespected and be mistreated, and I'm going to love you like the love of Christ. Like, those are two different things, right? And I think a lot of times people hear, well, we're going to extend grace, or we're going to stay at the table, or we're going to build a table together. They hear that and think, yeah, but you're going to let them do. No, that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is I'm going to do my very best to love like Jesus. That's what I'm going to do
every week. It makes me uncomfortable. I just want to be angry in here, and you're not letting me.
Listen, you can be angry. I'm trying to make it to this multicultural heaven. I'm
trying to get in. Well, and look, we just celebrated Easter, and you know what I mean? Like, Good Friday was a real thing. And even, look, there's a part of me that still even wrestles with the caveat, right? Like I want to, we're talking about it. We're going, hey, we want to stay at the table, and we won't allow ourselves to be mistreated at the table. And there's a part of me that even wrestles with that caveat, because Jesus didn't say that. Jesus didn't be like, look, if I'm mistreated, then this is all off. And I'm like, I don't like that part, because that's what people, you assume that people will mistreat you if you allow them. Like, they'll see you and like, oh, you're letting us mistreat you, we're just going to keep doing it, which, again, we've seen that historically. But there's something that I just am not comfortable with the caveat. I want to say it, and I do say it because I don't want to put anybody coming to mistreat me, but I'm not fully comfortable in it yet.
Yeah.
'Cause
I think it's because
Yeah.
we don't trust the
Yeah.
gospel. The gospel, like we always say, people are like, just preach the gospel. You're like, well, what do we say to the gospel preachers, the ones who enslaved us? what do we say to them? They had the gospel already. They were telling it. So what else? Is there a plan B to this?
Well,
Right. But
see-
the truth is that, but the thing is, there's a distrust
Yeah.
in the body of Christ with the exploitive, let me see, the drive of self-interest. You know, how self-interested we are it still is too great in the American church culture that it doesn't make it safe for you to not be. And so when you come into the room, you're like, man, I got to take care of myself because ain't nobody else going to do that. Meanwhile, the kingdom is supposed to be that the last person you think about is that you take care of yourself and you take care of everyone else around you because they will take care of you. And as we share each other's burdens, it's just that's not the world we have lived in. That's not the history. That doesn't color the history that we've been taught or have experienced, whether short term or long term. And so now you're asking me to step into this spiritual reality that doesn't match my physical, and it just creates this kind of reticence to be like, man, I want to believe that. That sounds like a beautiful thing. I'm just not sure.
I want to follow up on Jesus's model, but Shantara, tell us what you're thinking.
Well, and Marcus, I hear you. And that's why I have to be real and honest about it. I wonder if there is a place now for correction versus the caveat, because I think that's the piece that has not always been allowed, is the correction of, well, I understand this is what you've been taught, but this is not how it's going to be, and this is not. So I'm going to correct that behavior so that you don't continue to sin. I'm going to tell you the truth about this, and then this way we can move forward, or this way we, and I think for me that's what's missing, and that wasn't always allowed. That we just had to, this idea of just extending grace without correction, and I don't know if I'm not there. I think that when I'm saying, I'm going to stay at the table and we're going to have this conversation, there's also going to be a place for correction. That and that is where I am. I don't think I cannot anymore not correct, because I think for a long time I was just like, well, they don't know no better, so oh well.
Yeah.
And I'm just not there.
You're talking about advocacy, which I think the church doesn't have a really robust theology around advocacy, recognizing how God advocates for humanity and just speaking the world into existence. But then Jesus, as he incarnates, he advocates on all these different levels. He advocates by his choice to where he's going to incarnate and who he's going to incarnate as, which goes back to really being truthful about the cultural context in which Jesus chooses to put himself and who Jesus is culturally. That is a aspect that helps us get away from these ideas of white Jesuses and black Jesuses and Asian Jesuses. Although I love that people see themselves in Christ, concentrating on the decision that Christ made to put himself where he did and with whom he put himself is big. And then you follow Christ in how he advocates, when he speaks out against something, who is he speaking for? Right? Who are the people he's speaking, and then who is he speaking against? Who are the powers that he speaks against people like, Jesus was never political, whatever. No, he spoke very plainly to the political things that were going on, whether they were spiritual. We talked about this the other day. It's what spiritual or governmental. There are definitely things in which he said that would have made Caesar really frustrated with him.
Yeah.
Clearly he was, Herod was going to try to kill him as soon as he was born because he was coming in as the king of kings. So this idea of advocacy for others is a big piece that we just don't know. And I think that's what I hear when you say, Shantara, is like, the advocacy is, I need to correct you and stop you from doing the thing that you're saying about these people. You don't get to talk like that. I got in trouble for this at my last church. I was advocating for a group of people who had no voice in the midst of my church against someone who was basically blanketing a statement saying, "Oh, those people are so lazy. I'm not going to go volunteer over there." The whole community, and I sent a very helpful email in response with a couple of
So
bullet points,
helpful.
that kind of
So
stuff.
helpful.
And it
You
was
offered a little
immediately
assistance, just a
I
little
got in
bit.
trouble for it. I was pulled into the office by the principal. You know what I mean? And I think that's the difference where the church hasn't been able to go, no, you don't get to do that. And that's to your point, Antoine, is like, I'm okay. In some ways, I'm better. I feel better sacrificing myself if I know that there are advocates who are going to come and stop it.
Yeah.
Right. And Adrian, you were going to say something. I'm sorry.
Well, you talked about, I'll sit at the table. I have a caveat though. And Jesus didn't have a caveat, but I think that, he was always seeking the will of his father, so earnestly seeking the will of his father. And it's so clear, he was I'm going to use the word evade because that's just what comes to mind. Like, how many times did he evade an earlier persecution at the will of the Father so that the greater mission of God could be, And so I think, B. Matthews in here is using my word boundaries. Like, that's exactly what I'm thinking. Like, Jesus had boundaries, he had boundaries with his closest confidants. He had, boundaries within, the way he kept the law. Like, he had boundaries in understanding Jewish law that was basically defined by the culture, where they had increased the boundary, for a given law to keep themselves from breaking the law. They would widen its berth, right? And he would cut through that. I think he was working a lot with boundaries. And one of those things was like, who could harm him when? And so, yeah, you can say like, well, he didn't have that caveat. Like, he paid the ultimate price. He was willing to suffer for other people, but in God's time and in God's way. And I think that that's probably, it wasn't every day. It wasn't every time he sat down at the table, and it wasn't like constantly. So I don't know. That was just what I was kind of thinking through when you said that, is that if we want to be of service to God, like, our willingness to think of other people first isn't the rule. The rule is listening to God's will. And there will be times when God extends his protection and provision over us in a way that means we are thinking of ourselves and in the sense that we're thinking of how we're being obedient to the Lord. I don't know if I'm making sense, but
yeah, I think the default kingdom position is I for you. And then there's moments when we're spirit led, like you said, because we don't know what God is doing in his biggest picture. And so the thing that would override that default is a spiritual inclination. It would be what you're saying. Jesus is like, hey, I could let them throw me off this cliff in Luke 4, or it ain't my time or way for me to suffer. So I'm gonna skip out of that, and allow the spirit to dictate those sorts of things. And I think this is part of what it means to be disciples and learning this balance between what I'm going to call default kingdom ethic or default kingdom culture, where our natural inclinations are in one particular direction, or Jesus speaks it: love your neighbor, love your enemies, bear each other's infirmities, don't return evil for evil, all those sorts of things that we are taught. And then there are these moments where Jesus totally goes after the Pharisees and calls them out at the right moment, knowing exactly why he would do it, right? What you said with his timing. Knowing that would incite them, and knowing that would, accelerate this moment that he was going to be crucified in for the Passover. So I think there is that. I think it's a good point that it isn't love as the unadulterated. It is love, but it is second to. It's Hosea being told to marry the prostitute. Well, that's not the normal way to go. God might have to come in and say, hey, I'm doing this right now. And we should always be obedient to that. And it's the importance of being connected to what God is doing, in addition to embracing this love first sort of ethic.
Yes.
Let me go a little deeper in that. Just the reminder that we have to keep. And again, I'll talk about this robust sort of thought process about advocacy. When you look at the Trinity and how it engages in the world, it is advocating for others and it's advocating for the world, right? Like God And Jesus's model is advocation for the world and advocation for others. He doesn't advocate for himself. Part of the reason I think he doesn't allow people to throw him off a cliff, he says, my time has not yet come. What is that time? That time is for salvation of the world. That time is for the finishment of my mission to be ended in a particular way so that all the things happen that they need to happen. So even in his time of advocating for himself, he was actually thinking about the world. And I think about Dr. Martin Luther King, and, we talk about nonviolence and things. And I remember, there's a story of Selma, Bloody Sunday. You have John Lewis leading a crowd over the bridge, and they get, pummeled by the police and on national television, that kind of stuff. And then a few days later, Dr. King leads a group across the Edmund Pettus Bridge as well, and stops because the police are there. He stops and he kneels and he prays. And everybody gets down on their knees, and they kind of in the same kind of way. And then he gets up and he turns the crowd around. Now there was something that wasn't self-preservation, because he's put himself in positions before to be hurt, but he was thinking of something greater. He was like, this is not going to get the response. This is not going to do what we need it to do. So we have to go the other way. Some people could say, well, he didn't want to get beat up because these same police officers who beat John Lewis up a couple of days ago, whatever. But I think, again, there's this sense of it doesn't do anything for the movement to do this. And I think that's where I think, if we keep that to Leslie's point, B. Matthews, right? Like, there's boundaries, right? But there's surrender, but it's also like, how do we make it completely outside of ourselves? So we're not going, I'm protecting myself, but if I'm protecting myself, I'm doing it so that the world can benefit.
Exactly. Yeah. I've got a palate cleanser question for you guys.
I love it.
Because, talk about replaceable. You're going to have somebody else in here. Next month. I can guarantee it, because I'm not keeping the time worth anything. I promise. You guys will see a different face, and you'll know why. I'm not keeping the time.
You will have created another face.
You create another face. You're right on the whiteboard. You are creating a new face because there's a new face being entered into the world.
That's it.
You can answer this question in your sleep, I'm sure. Is there a difference between social justice and biblical justice? Break it down for us.
Go ahead, Antoine. I know you've just been waiting on the question.
Well, for me, biblical justice, so again, I always define these things the same way. So justice to me is things being what they are meant to be. And I know that's not everyone's view of justice. Some people view justice as getting what you deserve, and I disagree with that vehemently. Justice is about things being what they should be. That which is just, that which is right, that which is good, is that which is appropriate, which is what it was designated to be in its place, to do what it's meant to do, to find its place amidst harmony and beauty, right? To find its spot and to be there and to fulfill it and to do it. So a justice is that. So who gets to define who gets to tell us how things should be? Who gets to write? If we talk about justice as a song, then who's writing the music, and who's writing the music for each of the parts to play, right? Well, if you say, okay, well, biblical justice, if the Bible is writing the music of justice, then what we're saying is that God has created the world, and he has created the world and everything in it to perform and be in a particular place and way and things. And the Bible describes that as God creating humanity and all of us existing to love him and love each other and to exist in everything that the Bible tells us, and how we begin to achieve that, how we're far away from that, how Jesus helps us get access to reclaiming that just way of living. Social justice, who gets to decide what justice is? Social justice, oftentimes, for me, is defined by the social context. So in this particular scenario, when we're talking about race, for me, a lot of times social justice is tied to America, the American society. What is it that has told us that American society should be a certain type of way? The Constitution has told us that. So when I think about social justice, personally, I'm thinking about, okay, America, you said that the music that is justice should look this way and sound this way and be played this way. And the roles are supposed to look like this for all of the different things. Is that music being played right? Or are people overplaying or playing other people's music? Some music is not even being played. Have you shut people out? Blah, 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 blah. Like, do we have all the pieces making the music that you said was justice? And so there is a difference. Now, there's some overlap in America. There's some overlap between what the Bible declares a just way of doing things and what the American Constitution has declared. But at the end of the day, social justice has to do with the rights and the experiences and the opportunities afforded to every citizen in a society by that society's defining, if you will, composer, if I can continue with the music analogy. And the composer is the Constitution in America, and it has told us how the music should sound and how it should be played. Those in the symphony are raising their hands saying, hey, I think I'm supposed to be playing this and I don't have access to what I need to play that. I can't play my role. Somebody's keeping me from playing my role, or I have the violins music and I am a trombone, right? I need to have trombone music to play trombone so that we can get this music to sound the way it's supposed to be. So biblical justice says the Bible forms and tells us how all things should be. Social justice speaks into a very particular society and says what things should be from that. Drilled in even closer to that, for the Black persons in America, it has to do, well, for any persons in America, it has to do with your rights and your experiences and your opportunities that are supposed to be afforded to you as a citizen. So again, that's a big topic that I could probably do several webinars over. Once again, a kind of a broad stroke. And I'm sure there are some opposing or differing ideas around some of those definitions.
Well, and
I like it. Go ahead, Marcus. No, I was going to say, I just like the composer, analogy there. But what makes me think about social justice and the composers of the Constitution, because I think about, what if your composers are flawed, and what if they are wrong? And that is, to me, the difference between biblical justice. I think
Right.
about, our Savior is not wrong, but I think about man who, of course, wrote the Constitution, and who, had people enslaved and all that kind of stuff. So I always struggle with the Constitution. I know that is our, what we use for everything. But I always struggle with it because, of course, I think these men were flawed, for lack of a better.
Yeah. And I would say I think that's why, if we are Christian people, then the kingdom of God, which is enforced by a king and has its own ethic and definition of justice, comes from Christ and the kingdom. So the church in America should be pursuing a kingdom justice, which will make the social version of justice, it'll pale in comparison to what the church would do. But the church often has borrowed the social imperfections and adopted them and baptized them even, and made them into biblical things. And I think that's what we're starting to see with some of the white nationalism and some of the flip and the issues associated with some of the white evangelicalism that's on the more extreme side, political
and silence.
side. Right. And some of the silence. Right. And it kind of goes back to what we were saying before. If you're going to be pursuing God's order for things, then you're pursuing God's justice. And where's the energy, for that? But you're absolutely right, Shantara. I think every social justice that is not kingdom justice will inherently have flaws in them, because they are not the actual way God actually wants things to be done. So
and again, you can kind of fall, if I can say it for the listeners, butt backwards into some very biblical justice types of things, even from a flawed, even inside a specific social area. I'm looking at Mary's comment. I recall that U.S. Constitution is very, I think you're saying, white and property owned, male oriented, right? So the rights then that they were creating had a self motivation, right? We talked about, again, the difference between Jesus and how he deals with things, and the difference between how we do it. they were creating a constitution that was self-motivated. It wasn't others focused or world focused. It was self-focused on things that were going to protect their rights. And so other people's rights got, thrown to the side. And you could create, I see you, Mary, saying we could you should create a new constitution convention because our composers were flawed. Here's the deal. Anytime you create a constitution with people, it's going to be flawed, right?
Unless it matches kingdom.
Well, I still would say,
and it wouldn't, because we would again. It'd be thing we had to that was the law, was what the Jews lived in, exactly. And they failed miserably, repeatedly.
So I will say the only, not the only, but one of the main reasons Jesus was needed at all is because it was inevitable that we would never get it right. We couldn't do all the things. Somebody had to come who could do it for us, right? It's I can go into other things on that. So I do think it's important for the listeners. Like, biblical justice manifests itself in lots of different ways. And again, some of those do line up with some of the conversation you're hearing. So the Bible does have a retributive justice that goes through it, right? There is punishment when you do something wrong. So when you hear people talking about that, that's not necessarily only a social space, right? Like, that's also a biblical space. Right, there is a justice that is what you could call a workforce justice. It is you are getting rewarded for doing something good, right? Like, and this is to the point. I think there is, and I know you vehemently disagree with this question of you getting what you deserve, but there's an aspect of you do get what you deserve if you do the right thing in the Bible. There's a kind of justice that would be a workforce justice. There's also a restorative justice, making things right when things wrong were done to somebody. You broke their glass, you fix their glass. You know what I mean? Like, that's a restorative piece. And then there's this really crazy sort of justice that is kind of the family place justice. And this is that concept of Jubilee, which was articulated, I'm not going to say very cleanly, but it's articulated. Leviticus, I think 25 is where it's articulated. We don't have any like real examples of where it was practiced in the Bible. But when Jesus comes in Luke 4, he actually calls upon that idea of Jubilee in his entrance, in his coming out party, if you will, as the Savior. And it's this idea of where, it was this understanding that people would go through hard times, and then maybe they had land, but something would happen, the father would die or something, and they'd have to sell their land off to somebody so that they can survive. Mm-hmm. Right. And then something else would happen. They'd have to sell this, whatever. Maybe they'd end up with nothing. Maybe some famine comes through, maybe some war comes through, maybe something, and they don't have anything. And after a period of time, I think it was 70 years, they go, hey, let's get everything back to where it was. Those folks who have just had a hard time, their families have just been, no, you get your land back. And you knew it. Like, I'm not buying the land to take it from you and have it as my own to hold on to it. I'm buying it to actually give you money and that you don't lose it later, right? Like, I'm going to bring it back to you. So these are the kinds of justice that exist in the midst of the biblical conversation. And they don't necessarily all work in really many social cases. Some places do have more of those than America does. And so it's important that we recognize the differentiations. And when we see the antithesis of that, right? When we see people not getting punished for doing something bad, that's against the retributive justice that's in the Bible. When we get people getting stuff that they shouldn't get when they ain't done nothing, like, it's not completely unjust, you know what I mean? Particularly if they've cheated people and things of that nature, right? So we have to recognize that there's many facets to this justice conversation or justice piece as we look at it in the Bible. I think it's so easy.
It's the quality. It's the quality. It's not the. It's the intent of the result of that work that changes biblical and and say America. Like you mentioned, like we the Bible is not a space where people don't get what they deserve. People reap. The scriptures say you reap what you sow. Right, you sow apples, you get apples. You're not gonna get peaches, right? So right. we kind of got that, but but who are these peaches for? Is the difference between kingdom justice and sort of American social justice, right? Because in our context, those peaches are for me. But if we think like the
I earned
Garden of
these peaches.
I earned these pieces. I did it. You know, they belong to me. It is my property. Whereas you think about it, if you think about it like Garden of Eden or Pentecost or
Pentecost.
right, or even in Revelation, there's no hint that we, you know, this. It feels like it's going to be the same thing as was with Adam. Sit down. Hey, this whole thing, none of this is yours, and all of this is yours, right?
Right.
And Adam didn't work a minute for Eden, but he had to cultivate it for Eden. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
So it was his, but not his. You know, and the work
it's a stewardship conversation.
Yeah, it's a stewardship, and so there's work with stewardship, but it's slightly less in ownership, and that's going to be the difference, say, between that meritocracy mode between, like, say, American social. And I know we're in a little bit of the weeds with that, but I just wanted to mention it.
No, it's good. It's good. There's a lot in there.
There's nothing simple about justice by any format.
And that
Really
in
isn't.
and of itself right there should be said more and more. There's nothing simple about this. And I think, and Antoine, you said a lot, right? Like, we get caught up in the headlines, but we don't read the paragraphs. Right? We get hot and bothered about whatever, but like, you gotta go deeper in. Like, there are ways to find. I think everybody desire justice as a thought process, but you have to start to train to start to think what that looks like. We just throw the word out there, but there's a training that needs to be done so that we understand when we see it, how we engage in the conversation.
Yeah, I mean, real quick, I know you want to jump in, but I'm going to say this quick thing, and then I'm gonna get off justice. If Jesus is the bringer of justice, then grace is a part of justice, which pushes against this pure meritocracy version. And so here's where it flips on its head. It's the reason why I'm so vehemently against the corner, you know, the sort of a boxing version of, hey, justice is you get what you deserve. Because if justice were that, then Jesus and God are not just, right?
Right.
But they can't not be just, because they are the authors of justice. And what Jesus does is he says, hey, you're created for me. And what would be just is that you and I are in relationship with each other, because that's what's supposed to be. Now, you have fractured that, and you could get what you deserve, which would be hell, but it wouldn't be justice, because it didn't return to me what should be. So I'm going to die on the cross and make an opportunity for you to be restored to what should be, right? I'm going to make that about, and it's not that, I don't think it's dissimilar than me going to my son and saying, hey man, you can't have my son. My son was walking to school when he was younger, and he just took somebody's bike off of their patio. He just like, hey, he was like 7 years old. He's like, look, I got tired of walking, so I just took the bike. I'm like, you can't do that, man. That's not how that's going to work. Now, of course, he's got to take the bike back, but I could punish him. He stole it, right? And I could, and he would deserve that punishment. But if I have a conversation with E and I say, hey man, you understand that you can't steal, and I'm convinced that he is no longer going to steal, I can skip the punishment, because he will have been restored to the mindset of not. And so the punishment is not, so he didn't get what he deserved, but the putting things right had happened, and things had been just again. So I think the God's model, and so this view of putting things right informs our ability to love our enemies, informs our ability to reconcile. It informs this, it puts relationship or the right way of things ahead of eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, which would be retributive and purely you get what you get, right? And so it's got to go a little bit higher. I'm not saying that you were saying all that, Marcus, but there's a lot of preachers who do social justice conversations in their sermons. I think I've heard 8.
Oh yeah, for sure.
And the pastor says, let me define justice for you. Justice is you get what you deserve. And I'm out immediately. Because if that's true, then God is not just. And the cross was not just. But the cross was just because it made a path for things to be made right. And it could be made right through Christ. because we couldn't do it ourselves. That's the justice piece. And so we have started to apply that to our thinking.
Yeah. I love A.W. Tozer's knowledge of the holy. He works through the attributes of God and talks about how these things that to us as humans feel like really difficult to reconcile, that he's a God of love and a God of justice. And, you know, he's the law, but he's also this grace. He is grace and redemption. I love how he works through in that book. And basically the thesis is that we are finite created beings. Like, there is no possible way we can conceptualize of, you know, we can only just see this, like, you know, image darkly in a mirror, right? Reflected darkly in a mirror of who God is and how these things fit together. If it doesn't make sense to us, it's a reminder of how we are finite. But I can't help but think, you know, just it's in my head because, you know, just know that so many people are grappling with the God of the Old Testament and justice that looked like genocide, and you know, and all of these really tragic and confusing stories where God was, you know, endorsing behavior that seems, you know, unequivocally unjust, or even slavery, things like that. There are moments of that in the Bible, and I think that we could go on. And I have friends who are grappling with, if he's a good God and he really is, he knows what's coming, he knows everything, and he's all powerful, then why did he create this container in which we would fail? Like, he created this situation in which we would fail and sin and then reap consequences. So that's not to say let's talk about that. That's just to say, like, I'm voicing that out into the room, that people are grappling with these really complex ideas of what is justice as it's manifested through God's character and in the Bible. And you're in safe company if you are grappling with those really big, hard questions, because it is challenging. And I would almost, I mean, gospel justice is not the term, but I feel like I kind of wish that would feel like a little bit more on the nose for me about what we're trying to talk about in regards to justice as is manifest through Christ and the gospel, as opposed to the Bible as a whole. Not to say that those parts don't fit into the whole picture, but I think it's just so complicated.
It is. I mean, absolutely. And you know, you were talking, I was thinking about Micah 6:8. And we actually, there's kind of an extensive sort of discussion about this in some of our curriculum. But you know, and I think the question, if I can remember correctly from our curriculum, is he says, you know, do justice, love mercy, and walk humbly with your God. Like, how do those work together? Right? Because I don't think it's just like, okay, here's a compartment, but there's a way in which, as we even think about justice, like if you're coming to justice and its absence of kindness, in the way that you're going to, you know, impart it, and if it's absence of humility and understanding that you too also deserve a kind of justice in how you impart it, then in many ways you're not walking humbly with your God. There's a submission to God in the midst of that. Like, I'm being humble and going, I don't fully understand what justice is like or how to administer it on my own. I actually need to lean into the kindness and the humility that there's a God who actually knows this better than I do.
Yeah.
And I don't understand all those pieces, but that's where I have to trust, because I know that I can't administer it perfectly.
Yeah.
So it's an understanding of my frailty and my ability to not fully not just understand it, but to act on the things of this world.
Yeah.
That humility is so big, and that's why we in our Threaded Collective, we had, you know, Dr. Amanda Giordano do a whole thing on like cultural humility, like because humility is such a big piece of the conversation. It's why Shantara is like, I'm trying to be humble, like, and understand like where you came from. I mean, it's an empathy as well, but it's also like I'm trying to understand where you're coming from, because I know that myself, I can be in this same position.
Yeah, it's the ingredients of reconciliation. Like, it's in the ingredients. Like, if you're gonna bake a cake of reconciliation, like, you can't bake it without
that is so true.
Without humility. The cake falls flat or it doesn't rise. Whatever happens with cakes don't do what they're supposed to do.
Yes.
You don't bake.
I don't know. Right? Is that right? It doesn't raise.
during this week.
She said, clearly we don't answer no do no big.
we have 2 more questions, and we got a current event that I want to make some space for us to talk about, and then I think that the last question we can kind of each close out on with a final word. So, Shantara, I'll let you kick this one off. We have a question about, why do you think it's easier for the church to rally behind assisting Ukrainian refugees versus Afghan refugees?
The truth, I think when this first, and I still can't believe that there is this senseless, stupid war happening. I pray, and let me tell y'all this. I pray for Putin because I believe that Jesus can save anybody. And so I've been praying for his salvation, like in the middle of making a decision, that the Holy Spirit would just come up on him and he'd be like, oh my God, I need to repent right now. That is what I've been praying for. But I also think that the way that people see the Ukrainians, they see them as white people, and they see them having to leave their homes with their stuff, and they see them with their white children, and they see, they're not Ukrainians, they are white people who have been displaced by this man, and it is awful. I think when people look at Afghanistan, they see it not as a Christian place, so they see it as, if only they knew Jesus. If only those brown people knew Jesus, then this would not be happening. So it is a very judgmental, wrong place to come from. And so I think we support and come around people who, one, we think believe what we believe. And then 2, we think, oh my gosh, these poor white people having to leave their home. So we are so able to disconnect from what is happening, what is still happening in Syria and Afghanistan. We're able to disconnect from that. And we identify with people in Ukraine. It is sin is real, and that's why my heart goes out to people who have been taught this lie about who Jesus is, what Jesus looked like, what the disciples look like, because it spills over into so much more than what we talk about around our dinner table.
Yeah, it's been interesting to watch, because some people are on the Putin side, and I would make the case that that some of those voices see themselves in Putin, and there's other people who somehow see themselves in Ukraine. I have this crazy thought that we're just hopelessly addicted to ourselves, and that we're looking at the world, looking at every picture, trying to find where we are in that picture, and then we inherently root for that person, wherever they happen to be in the thing. If we're left to our own device, it's kind of like taking a picture, group picture. When you look at the group picture, the first person you're looking for is you. As you're like, hey, where
and then
am
we
I
have to retake it.
You're right. And like, if I ain't right, then we got everybody lining back up, right?
I know you look good in some, but I didn't. So.
Yeah,
run it again. We lost him. He's like, he got excited and got himself. You know what I mean? And this, I kicked him off because I was looking at the pictures. I was like, get yourself off of this thing because it doesn't look right for you to be. But yeah, welcome back.
I have no idea how that happened.
Antoine, you didn't like what you were looking like on the picture.
That's so right. As we got redo. Yeah. No, but I think we look at the world like we look at group pictures, right? We're always looking for us in the picture. And so I think there's some reason, to your point, Shantara, there's some reason that Americans see themselves in Ukrainians, those who root for them. And there's others who see themselves in Putin. And they root, although increasingly getting quieter and quieter these days, but they've started rooting for Putin, and there's something psychological about that we don't have to get into. That's going to get way too political, I think. But it is a thing, and I think in Syria, I think people don't locate themselves in the face of Syrians, or Afghans. Sorry, Afghans.
Either one.
Either one, right? It's hard for us to find ourselves in their story, and so it doesn't matter. But for some reason, especially right now in this very contentious moment in the culture wars in America, where it's so much about the powerful versus the not powerful, and then here comes this powerful country trying to exploit a non-powerful. It was funny for me to see that those who were fighting for the marginal here found it easy to root for Ukraine, and those who were against social justice, many of them were also finding reasons to say, hey, we're sympathetic to Russia. And I think that is something. So I think the answer is we don't see ourselves in in the Afghan and Syrian conflict, which has something to do with us, with our addiction to ourselves.
Well, and again, we're a visual society, and our divide, our racialization has predominantly been furthered and supported from a difference in the color of people's skin, right? Like, I mean, there's a couple of people's skin, there's facial structures, but people don't like talk about people who look like me and go, hey, they don't go, this is the big nose people, right? They go, they're black people. So they're talking about like literally the color of people's skin is a determinant about who is of value and who is not. That is the history of how we think about things in this country. So you start to think about the media, and you start to think about the pictures that are being communicated, right? Like the leader of the Ukraine, if he doesn't say anything, it looks like a white dude. I mean, he looks white dudes in my gym, you know what I mean? In Putin, same way. He looks like these white guys, you know what I mean? And you go to Afghans, they don't look like that. Their skin tone is different. Skin tone is just different. We are so indoctrinated with this value placement on people's skins. It is so hard to disconnect from it. As much as you even desire, the bias work shows us that we have a bias this way. And so you have to take those thoughts captive and evaluate them, own them first. And that's the problem, is we don't own them. Like, gosh, I've really been rooting. Let me check my posts. How many posts did I talk about with the Afghans? How many posts did I do Syria? How many posts? Oh, my Ukraine posts there's just a lot more. Why a lot more for Ukraine? Could it possibly be connected to this long history of stratification by the color of people's skins? And again, you sprinkle in, obviously, the aspects of war in which we as America have been in. I mean, we haven't had war on our country, but whenever we've gone to war, and particularly the longest war that we've had has been in, Afghanistan.
Yeah.
It goes all the way back to 9/11, right? Like that's the time when America was like, oh, we're going to do this. So there's a connection to anybody of that kind of skin tone, or I'll even say the country name immediately puts them at an enemy. We've been told that that's in some ways an enemy for 20 something years.
Yeah.
So it's easy to not want to respond well to that, as opposed to Ukraine, and the pictures, and to the Antoine's point too, everything you've been shown about the Afghans shows dirt mountains and caves. That's the descriptions, right? Because we're always looking at it from a military perspective view, and so we're just seeing like things blow up. We're seeing broken villages. We're seeing dirt. We're not seeing life. We're not seeing like buildings that have been built by sophisticated people with equal intelligence. But when you think about the Ukraine, they're giving you these opposites. Oh, let me show you what the city looked like before this war.
Universities.
Universities. These people who were just sending their kids to school a week ago and playing in the park together a week ago are now running for their lives. You know what I mean? So it's like, these people are just like us. But you ain't hearing that. The Afghans who were playing with their kids in the street. No, these cats have been dealing with war for 20 years. They ain't a normal life like us, quote unquote. So I think that's part of it too.
Yeah, there's the real quick. I know, Adrian, I think you're going to jump in, but I'll say there's this ideological thing too. There's the skin color, but there's the Ukraine wanted to be democracy, and so there's this whole democracy versus communism. That is there, and then there's also the religious ideology that the Russian state, Orthodox state, are anti-LGBT, are championing a lot of the same.
You can say Afghans are doing the same thing.
Theological positions that make it easier for some folks here to say, "Hey, I'd rather, Ukraine is just as corrupt as, they're closer to the left than they are to the right in their theology, and therefore, I'm team right. I'm team I'm team
Yeah.
Russia because the church there agrees with my political stance and how I squared that with my values, my Christian values. So there's people who are siding with Russia for race, I think, for political ideology and for religious ideology, and vice versa for Ukraine, especially as I've listened to some of the YouTube stuff that I almost had to throw up after.
Well, I think
Sorry, we're just interrupting. I don't know. I want to just be clear. Like, I don't know if that that connection to following after Russia is as widespread as we're making it sound.
yeah,
I,
I would agree. And the question was framed as, why do you think it's so much easier for the church to support
Yeah.
Ukrainian
But
refugees?
the reason I'm saying that is, I got the question, but the reason I'm saying it is the church. There's a huge contingency of the church that wasn't supporting Ukraine. I had to give you a couple, but there's now again, they're quieter about it because it's not popular to say it. So those things are happening in echo chambers, but it's not a given that the church is all in on Ukraine. I guess is what I'm saying.
yeah,
No,
I agree with that.
Yeah, and I can see what you're saying. And I think, tragedy. I mean, I kind of wrote about this. I think there's like 2 months ago when I was just writing the mid-month newsletter talking about comparative suffering and how it doesn't help anyone. It doesn't help us,
Sure. You mean
to
like a
think.
suffering Olympics kind of thing.
Yes,
Yes.
and and so it's like, we need, we are all here, grieving for Ukraine. That is so true. And we're parsing out this question, like, why is the church getting up out of their seats and, wanting to do something about Ukrainian refugees and the crisis in Ukraine as opposed to Afghanistan? And that's what we're parsing out here. But tragedy, is a grief for all of us. We don't want that. And I think that, beyond the color of skin, just like in my own personal life, when someone who's in my family or in my close friend group is experiencing hardship, suffering, conflict,
Yeah.
I know the ins and outs of that. I know the history of that. And so I am following it more closely than something that is further out of my sphere. And so um, I think that is true for a lot of white American, churchgoers, that the story of World War II, the story of the Cold War, the story of the breaking up of the USSR has been represented, has been told to us. It's such a more familiar story. And I
Sure.
remember what it was like to be in high school and be learning firsthand about the Rwandan genocide and being utterly appalled as a young person that we weren't getting involved and that we didn't get involved and that we didn't get involved sooner. And I think that knowledge is access. And it's not a coincidence that our media is blowing up and covering Ukraine in an entirely different way. Yes, we consumers, the church at large is more invested, but that's, it's like an echo chamber because we're also being fed much more specific information. The images that we're being fed are different. It's different. And the more the more deeply engaged you can get, even with people who don't look like you. It's possible. But you have to be hungry for that knowledge. And that's what you're saying. Like, it's easy to be like, well, Rwandan genocide, like, wow, that was just a tribal thing. What can we do? Like, I don't even know. That's out of our sphere. Or like, oh my goodness, what's been going on in Afghanistan's been going on forever. Like, we've been in there forever. Like, we couldn't fix it in that time. What were we going to do? And so I think that so much of it is about not only seeing ourselves in it, that's so true, but just like our own willingness to push through to get the information we need versus already having been supplied with the information that we need.
And Mary talks about that on the chat here. She's ultimately engaging in thoughts with with relationships. You know what I mean? People didn't care about the Syrian refugees, but those who knew Syrians did.
Yes.
Right. So this is another plug. If, as she says at the bottom, like diversity and community and relationships are important to be able to identify with other humans. It's another plug for engaging and desiring the diversity, to be connected to the diversity
Yeah.
around you. But at the same time, it's also a plug to not, right? Because the more diverse your space is, the more you have to kind of care about more. You know what I mean? Like you have
Yeah.
to actually like now it hurts
Yeah.
a lot more when you see that. And that's
Mhm.
what and I try to do this with my sons when we pray at night, you know what I mean, with them. We pray for our brothers and sisters in the Ukraine. We pray for our brothers and
Yeah.
sisters in Russia, right? Because I tell them like we are all kind of as humans brothers and sisters because we have a single maker, single father, but there's also the body of Christ that exists in both of those places. And so we are constantly thinking that there are people who ultimately will be with us in heaven who are experiencing these things, whether it be in Syria, whether it be in Afghanistan. When Afghanistan was going on, we were praying the same thing. And so we have to remind ourselves that we actually do have family in all these spaces. What does that mean to
Yes.
us now?
Yeah. So good. Well, let's wrap up with this last question. It's really good. We have someone that's wanting some go to phrases to memorize just to kind of have in their back pocket to use when you're in a group or in a conversation, you get some aggressive pushback about racial dialogue. So, this was actually requested by a member of one of our threaded groups. And I just want to give each of you a chance to say kind of what are some of those phrases that you keep in your back pocket when things get tense?
Are these phrases that we want to say out loud, or are these just things that help things,
Get out
things,
Personal
loud.
mantras.
things that help us think right? You know, there are
Don't throw
certain
hands. Don't throw hands. No.
exactly, yeah. Is it self-talk phrases
No,
or
this is outward facing
okay?
de-escalation or just, or moving forward. I mean, I'm saying de-escalation, but that may not necessarily be the case. They're saying
Yeah,
go-to phrases
okay.
to memorize when you get aggressive pushback about racial dialogue.
What do you mean by that? No, I mean that's the phrase,
That's your phrase, yeah.
That's the
right? Like,
phrase.
Mhm.
help me understand. It's the
Yeah.
the textbook stuff. What do
It's
you
the
mean
Mhm.
by
That's good,
that?
Marcus.
Help me understand.
Say
Because
more.
you know what I mean. Say
Mhm.
more, like about that. It's you go towards if you're getting pushback. It's going back to the conversation we had before. We've had this. I was talking to the boys about the Will Smith thing, right? And saying it's not the question's not what's wrong with him, but what happened to him, right? It's a different thing. It becomes empathy to go. There's something that happened here that I need to find out about. So it's an investigation. So be curious as
Right.
opposed to
Mm.
confrontational. So if somebody comes at
Mhm.
you, they're pushing back instead of be like, "Oh yeah," which is what I really like to do. And Adrian, I know you do too, right? Like,
Ready.
it's the like, okay, tell me more about that. Let me try to investigate and get
Mhm.
deeper because there's something behind that um, that is really the root cause. You have to go upstream, if you will,
Mhm.
to find what's really
Mhm.
coming out of that conversation. That's me.
Agree 100%. Different question, but same idea. Be curious. You have to fight off confrontation, that confrontational energy, and if it's at the point where it may be at the point where you have been not been doing that, like you started out fine and then it's escalated, right? But the question I always fall back on, I like to say wow. Wow is a very neutral thing. So somebody says something, whether I like or dislike it, I kind of like, wow, okay. Kind of like Chris Rock when he got wow.
Don't.
Okay, no, I don't want to do it. Never mind. But just that's just a bad joke. It's too
Good.
silly.
It's not
No,
too
it's
But
good.
not.
It's really
Actually,
not.
it's full circle. I
it's
appreciate
right.
that.
We're right here. But no, wow is a great word. Um, just monitor your eyes, and then the next thing is I like to say, so tell me how you got there. Very similar to what Marcus is talking about, but okay, wow, okay, so tell me how you got there, or I'm trying to follow you. So what you're saying is restate, right? Because
Mhm.
um, it's about understanding. And we say this in our training and in other places. This is what I say to my head. Remember, I'm listening for fear, not for fight. And what I'm listening for is what this person might be afraid of. They're either afraid that I think they're dumb, or that I think they're
A racist.
evil, or I think they're irrational, and their anger isn't even coming from the data. It's coming from the protection of their self perception of you must think I'm an idiot, or you must think that I'm this. And so if I can identify okay, this person is worried that I think they're an idiot. Then I can then go into the statement and say, man, it makes a lot of sense based on what you told me after you've answered the question of how'd you get there. Okay, it makes a lot of sense that you could get there. That makes sense. Have you thought about, right? But it's not ever really, and it's really tough, the emotional sort of intelligence or discipline to not allow yourself to really engage fear with fear, but to jump in with that curiosity, try to disarm the fear. I think you're a rational person. I don't think that you're evil. I don't think that whatever it is, you can figure out that they're really defending themselves with, and then say, have you thought about? And sometimes you might have to just understand that this is a 3-part conversation and this is only part 1. So you're just going to get a little bit of what you got to say in, and then you say, okay, man, well, maybe we'll talk about this a little bit more later and keep it moving, and tap out, if you will. And
that's a good one right there.
Yeah.
We'll talk.
And if
Maybe we can talk about this more another time.
Yeah, because if the emotions are too high, then the rational approach just will not work, and you just might need to go ahead and say, hey, you know what, we might need to hit this at another time. I'm getting, and then with that, this is the tactic I use with my wife, actually. So not in a race, but I would say, I'm feeling like I'm not going to be helpful in this conversation right now. So, because I'm all riled up. Can we just hit this pause button, right? I just need a break for a second. I promise you this is important enough that I'm going to deal with it. That's my wife. But for them, if you don't feel like you're ready, then it's better to back away and reset.
I love the idea of, I love being curious. And I think that anytime we approach any conversation with that true, authentic curiosity, I can't say wow because my face is too transparent, and it's just not going to go well. Like I can see it right now.
Wow. Okay.
You really just said so. I do find myself saying a lot. Say more about that, because I am curious as to how did we get here. And then I love the idea of, I really just decided or landed on, racism is about fear. And so I'm praying constantly that, that I'm able to speak to the fear and really not make it anything else. And if I stay curious about where that fear started from with you, and I agree, we're probably not going to reach it at the end of this conversation. So it's just that I'm like, that's interesting. Not in a condescending way, but I really want you to say more. I want to hear where you're coming from, and then we can probably pick this up later. But I don't argue with people. The Bible says when you argue with fools, and so I don't argue with people about my worth, about whether or not my ancestors should have been here. I don't argue about whether enslavement was right or wrong. I don't argue about that because it doesn't make sense to me. But I am curious about people when they say, well, this is how it's always been, and it was much better back then. And I'm like, really? Say more about that. Because I'm really curious and interested in to see how we got here.
Yeah. And I think we, when we're in these moments, our gender and our race are playing in, and their gender and their race are playing in. So the idea that we can even have like go-to phrases, as alluring as it is, it's not always going to work. And for me, like the majority of the conversations I've been in have been with fellow white people, and then it's escalating. And then there's usually a pretty distinct age gap. And, aiming for questions, because I just am like an innately curious person, and I'm in here to know more, has been experienced as she wants to skewer me with my own words. Like she wants me to, sort of like harm myself. With my own words. And so they like, even when I'm asking, tell me more, or tell me what like that was a very distinct one, like, tell me what you mean when you say this word, that whatever this phrase is that feels very vague and ambiguous. I think this very loaded. Like, tell me what you mean when you say this. they get really angry and it really escalates quickly. And so, yeah, I think I've had personally a little more luck with what I think I'm hearing you say is, or tell me if I'm hearing you right, that this has been your experience. And then, as best I can, just like thanks for sharing that with me. That gives me some insight here. And, for me, usually when they're escalated, it does need to be like, we'll have to come back to that later, and I'll just say like, I've had pretty different experiences, or I've heard stories that, that lead me to think in a totally different direction. You'll have to let me know if you ever want to talk more about that and give them the option. Like they may not want to hear from me, so
Well,
that's
and
just been, yeah.
I think, and I think that's a really great thing to just articulate too. Is some of this is how do I deal with some of this heat that comes after me? And if you study negotiation, one of the things you recognize is that people don't want to be the villain. So when you articulate aspects of quote unquote villainy, or you say things that show an opposite of what they're doing that they want to aspire to, it helps in getting them to where you want them, right? So what I find myself is sometimes people will come and they'll have a lot of passion and maybe even anger or whatever, and I'll go, wow, and you seem pretty like heated about this, like you're bringing a lot of heat. I don't know, can we have the conversation? I mean, you might need to. I don't know if this is a safe spot, right? And nobody wants to be told that they're not a safe person. So they start to kind of breathe it out a little bit and go, okay, no, it's not, I'm not angry, right? Like, cause that's the thing. Like anger is a bad thing. So they go, I'm not angry. I'm just, what I'm trying to say is, and it immediately goes to that. Or if they're getting angry, it's like, or if they kind of go in a different direction, you go, I really appreciate how, how kind you are being in this, like how transparent you're being and how authentic you're being in this. And they want to be that. So they start to go to that. So that's kind of an old negotiation piece that I go to as well, is like, I want to name what is happening in the space. And particularly if it's one of those places that people get villainized for, right? Black people always get around anger, you know what I mean? That it immediately people want to go away from that. So that's been helpful for me quite a bit too.
Yeah, I would say too on that, like, and that's been really helpful for people who don't know me very well. So like, since I'm on Facebook or meeting people for the first time, or don't have really, or people who I'm not engaged with a whole bunch, those methods have been really, really, really helpful in those scenarios. There is a little bit of a different take when you're dealing with, say, family members who, if you're dealing with mom or auntie, and when you say that to them, there's a different, there's sometimes can be a different kind of interchange. And I think what I've learned is to fight for the relationship even before making my point. And so I tap out earlier sometimes with family to make sure, so it's kind of a weird thing. It's not a statement. It's really a frame of thinking. But what I don't want to do is damage the relationship. So what I'm going to do is I am going to let them know that I have a different point of view. So at some point in the conversation, I'm like, well, I'm not sure I'm with you on that. Right. This is what I've been seeing. And if it gets all heated, then I'm looking to go ahead and tap out of that a little bit sooner. They're family, so the likelihood is I'll get the chance to revisit this again, especially if we've got good relational equity, and it just becomes a longer term project than, say, someone who might be coming up to you who you don't know or haven't known for very much or don't talk a whole bunch with. And then I think these tactics we've been talking about work really well in the scenario where you're dealing with someone who's relatively, I don't want to call them stranger, but they're not really, really close to you relationally. Yeah. The tap out, you can't be afraid to tap out, because I know, and the thing that makes you not want to do that is you're like, I need to correct them, because I can't have them going around being a menace with these with these ideas. Like, they're going to spread these terrible ideas, right? And it makes you want you want to do that, and then you don't want to be silent. You don't want to be you want to advocate, and so you're trying to balance advocacy and protecting this relationship, and it could be a tricky thing to do. You just don't have to get everything in one meal.
It's so true. even though we tried to get everything in this one conversation, which we do every month. It's
Every
my
single
favorite
time.
conversation
Every
every
time.
single month.
Hey, and Adrian, we've got the collective on that too. We have
That's
have
right.
an actual in our collective. It's $10 a month. We're putting webinars in there that help you deal with some of these things. We did a whole I don't know if it was that wasn't in the collective.
It is. Did you talk about tap out?
The tap out is, but I was also thinking of we did a conversation around Thanksgiving here that talked about how do you go to your Thanksgiving and how do you
Yeah.
Oh, it may be in there because I'm slowly.
It's here on YouTube. If you're on
It
YouTube,
is on
you
YouTube.
can-
Yeah, so that's right. That's right. Yeah, you can look back on the YouTube channel.
But in the collective, we're putting those things in there. How to talk about this, how to have conversations. We do have one on how to have difficult conversations in there with Dr. Daryl Bach, right? So we're feeding that. So if you haven't, I'm Adrian, I'll let you take it at this point. You know what I mean? Collective. I was about to do your job in here, but
It is. It's such a beautiful place to be at our collective. It is a monthly membership community where we go deep and we give wonderful support to our members in terms of continual education around racial dialogue and just continually filling ourselves up with great speakers and kind of just rules for the road and also encouragement to keep moving forward when it gets discouraging. So you can check that out at wearethreaded.org/collective.
Collective.
Thanks, Antoine.
and Shantara, I'm putting her on the spot here. She's going to create a webinar for us.
Oh,
Oh
there it is.
yes, I love
Yes.
it. Well, I'm really looking forward to that, and I that
Challenge.
is so rich. Like when we get to talk every month, and especially when we get to have a guest. So thank you so much, Shantara, for
Thank you
coming.
for having me. This was fun. This was great.
I wanted any of our viewers to know you can follow Shantara. Do you think that Instagram is best, Shantara? She's at marvelous_Shantara. On Instagram, and she's got this new book coming out in August. Yes,
Well,
Courageous Discomfort.
Supply issues. It's coming out in September, but it
Okay.
is coming out.
But you can
so I'll have to
pre-order.
come back. Yes, you can
Yes.
pre-order. You can go to actually have the link in my profile on Instagram. But yeah, you can pre-order.
Yes, so pre-order that because that is more of this great conversation. I can tell, and then we would love to invite you, to go ahead and join our Threaded Collective, and then we also have our Threaded Community, which is free to join and has ongoing like Q&A. And great dialogue there too. So you can also check out. We've got so many offerings. Color commentary as well. We gotta give them a plug. As though Marcus isn't already doing it back there behind him. We got color commentary.
Yeah. Color commentary.
Really
There's the logo right there.
Just kind of really like pushing the envelope every month. It's really good. So if you wanted more, if you're a little feistier, a little bit on the feistier side, you can go over there and hear their latest talks on YouTube. And next month we'll be back hosting another Q&A conversation. So be on the lookout for details. And we're so glad that you guys joined us tonight.
All righty. See you later.
Bye.